Mr. Dave Zirin, how you doing, sir?
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me on.
Oh, thank you. Always a pleasure speaking with you. Give you a proper introduction. Sports editor for The Nation, host of Edge of Sports podcasts, and he is my co-host weekly on The Collision, where sports and politics collide on WPFW 89.3 FM every Thursday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern. Mr. Dave Zirin, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing great.
So thanks again for coming on the rematch and basketballnews.com and Fly TV. So today we're going to break down and have a real discussion about Kyrie Irving, the backlash he is receiving after posting the documentary that was based on the book From Hebrews to Negroes, Wake Up Black America by Ronald Dalton Jr. And I haven't read the book and I haven't seen the documentary, but, I've definitely seen the reactions from it. And you wrote an article in The Guardian called Kyrie Irving and the Fraught History of Our Collective Liberation. So we'll play a clip of Kyrie's press conference from earlier this week, answering reporters questioning why he retweeted the doc. And he had a back and forth with reporter Nick Fidel. So take a look.
And it's a title given to Christ, Philippians 2:11. And my name translates in the Hebrew language as Yahweh. So I went on to Amazon Prime. I was like, you know what, let me see if there are any documentaries on Yahweh. So went in the search bar, typed in Yahweh. That came up. Went out and shared it on my platform. That was my night. In terms of the backlash, or what people call it, we're in 2022. History is not supposed to be hidden from anybody. And I'm not a divisive person when it comes to religion. I embrace all walks of life. You see it on all my platforms. I talk to all races, all cultures, all religions. And my response would be, it's not about educating yourself on what Semitism is and what anti-Semitism is. It's really about learning the root words of where these come from and understanding that this is an African heritage that is also belonging to the people. Africa is in it, whether we want to dismiss it or not. So the claims of anti-Semitism and who are the original chosen people of God, and we go into these religious conversations and it's a big no-no. I don't live my way like that. I don't live my life that way. Excuse me, I grew up in a melting pot, and I say a melting pot of all races, white, black, red, yellow, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, and you can see the way I live my life now. I'm not here to be divisive, so they could push their agenda. I don't want to say they, because I'm not identifying any one group or race of people, but I'm in a unique position to have a level of influence on my community. And what I post does not mean that I support everything that's being said or everything that's being done, or I'm campaigning for anything. All I do is post things for my people in my community and those that it's actually going to impact. Anybody else that has criticism, it obviously wasn't meant for them.
Hopefully I'm understanding what you said, and I want to make sure I get it right because I don't want to misquote any part of it.
I don't expect understanding from a media conglomerate group that sincerely talks about the game of basketball, and then we bring up religion as if it's correlative at times when it's convenient for people to bring it up. So please just be direct with your question so we can move on from this and I could talk about the game and go home to my son Elohim and my wife Marlene, okay?
Am I to take it that this was, what you shared was not something that you've even watched? This was, you did watch it, or either watch it or read it.
I had a lot of time last year to read a lot. Read a whole bunch. Good and bad about the truth of our world.
So then do you, I guess, understand or not understand those that might imply that that work had anti-Semitic leanings in it? I only ask this because the tweet is still up there, so
we're in 2022. It's on Amazon, a public platform. Whether you want to go watch it or not is up to you. There's things being posted every day. I am no different than the next human being, so don't treat me any different. You guys come in here and make up this powerful influence I have over top of the adultery of, oh, you cannot post that. Why not? Why not? Everybody posts everything else. You saw the word nigger going up on Twitter, right? I don't hear uproar on that. I'm not here to be divisive on what's going on this or that. I'm not comparing Jews to blacks. I'm not comparing white to black. I'm not doing that. That conversation is dismissive, And it constantly revolves around the rhetoric of who are the chosen people of God. And I'm not here to argue over a person or a culture or religion on what they believe. No, this is what is here. It's on a public platform. Did I do anything illegal? Okay. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Did I do anything illegal? Did I hurt anybody? Did I harm anybody? Am I going out and saying that I hate one specific group of people? So out of all the judgment that people got from me posting, I just, without talking to me, and then I respect what Joe said, but there has a lot to do with the not ego or pride of how proud I am to be an African heritage, but also to be living as a free black man here in America, knowing the historical complexities for me to get here. So I'm not gonna stand down on anything that I believe in. I'm only gonna get stronger because I'm not alone. I have a whole army around me.
Kyrie, while we're on the topic of promotion, why did you decide to promote something that Alex Jones said?
That was a few weeks ago. I do not stand with Alex Jones' position, narrative, court case that he had with Sandy Hook, or any of the kids that felt like they had to relive trauma, or parents that had to relive trauma, or to be dismissive to all the lives that were lost during that tragic event. My post was a post from Alex Jones that he did in the early 90s or late 90s about secret societies in America of occults, and it's true. So I wasn't identifying with anything of being a campaignist for Alex Jones or anything. I was just there to post, and it's funny, and it's actually hilarious because out of all the things I posted that day, that was the one post that everyone chose to see. It just goes back to the way our world is and works. I'm not here to complain about it. I just exist.
And to follow up on the promotion of the movie and the book,
Can you please stop calling it a promotion? What am I promoting?
put it out on your platform.
But I'm promoting it? Do you see me me
By
in front of
putting it out
the
there, people
title?
are going to say that you are
Yeah, I put
promoting.
it out there just like you put things out there, right?
Yeah, but
Okay.
it's not
You put
stuff,
things out there for a living, right?
right? But my stuff
Great.
is
So
not
let's move on.
filled
Let's
with
move on.
anti-Semitic
Let's
stuff.
move on. Don't dehumanize me up here.
I'm not doing
I'm
that.
another
You're
human
free
being.
to post
I can post whatever I want. So
can post
say
what-
that and shut it down and move on to the next question.
But Kyrie, you have to understand that by
I don't have to
post-
understand anything from you.
But it's
Nothing.
not me.
Nothing.
By
It's no
posting
people that
what
you're
you
making
did,
up, bro. Move on.
But by posting
Move
what
on.
you
Next
did,
question. Next
anybody
question. Do
is
you
going
guys
to
have
look
any more
at
questions
it
for
and they're
me?
going to say,
You guys have any more
does he have
questions? Because this is going to be a
anti-Semitic
clip.
beliefs?
This is going to be a clip that he's going to marvel at. Is this any more questions?
But you're not answering the question.
Oh, this is another answering your question. Oh my God, let's make another Instagram clip so we could be famous again. Next question.
Kyrie, basketball related.
So there's a lot to unpack with this. Let's start with your article, Dave, where the subtitle is Kyrie's anti-Semitism isn't new, but his allies are, and that's terrifying. So I want to ask you, is it fair to label Kyrie as anti-Semitic after posting this documentary without any context, without any explanation he didn't give? He just posted a documentary. But is it fair to jump to anti-Semitic, or do you think that's kind of warranted by him posting this documentary?
I mean, I think you have to look at a little bit of a train of behavior. And to me, it starts with, and this is what's been so hard about this, Etan, is that I've been somebody who's defended Kyrie for years around, his efforts to be, I guess I would call it an iconoclast, his own person in the league. But in this particular case, I think he took it a step far. I mean, to me, he took it a step far. It started when these right wingers started to organize on his behalf when he was not getting the COVID vaccine. And, and he wasn't the only NBA player who that happened to, but you compare his reaction to that to, say, Bradley Beal, when people started to defend Beal for not doing it. And Bradley Beal was like, yeah, I don't want your support. We actually don't believe the same things. And this is a separate issue. And I could actually really, really respect that coming from Beal.
Okay.
Like, he cut that off right away. Kyrie did not. Not at all. In fact, he encouraged it. And then you factor him posting that video, a video by Alex Jones. Now, Kyrie is a smart guy. Duke University, comes from a very, very intelligent background. I've met his dad before. He was a coach, and He knows what he's doing. He's not, a 19-year-old clicking like on something and then being like, and then having to, have apologized for it or anything like that. This is a grown man, a wealthy man, a businessman. He knows what he's doing. I give him that, and it's a respect. It's like, I think the worst thing we could do right now is to be, and you've heard me say this before, is to sort of patronize him to the point where we're like, well, he knows not what he does. I mean, I think he knows exactly what he's doing. And I think when you post a video by Alex Jones, you're making a statement. And we know who Alex Jones is. But I didn't say anything then either, because it's like, okay, he posted a video. I don't want to be part of some kind of, big scrum around this person, because I don't know who that serves.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, and I watched the video largely on fast forward. I'll be honest about that, because some of it was really hard to watch. But it traffics in the worst of the worst of things that Jewish people have had to confront and deal with. I mean, a lot of the movie comes from this book, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was written in Tsarist Russia as a way to justify pogroms against Jewish people. And all the stuff about modern Jews are Satanists, not real Jews, drink blood. I mean, stuff that's just like Rich Eisen said it pretty well. I'm not some big Rich Eisen fan, but when he talked about it, he said, it's not so much about what was said, but it was how it made me feel. And I knew immediately, what this was all about. And there's a way in which how, like, I felt it inside, where I was kind of like, oh crap, I'm going to actually have to write about this and take it on, because can't just let this kind of stuff lie. But the way I wanted to take it on, though, and then I'll stop filibustering. But like you said, it is a lot. The way I wanted to take it on and discuss it was to, first of all, to understand that there is a material basis. This is not new in terms of tension between Black and Jewish communities, and those communities have not. I want to be very clear about this. Have not existed on an equal plane, and I don't like it when people talk about it like that, as if, oh, you have these two oppressed groups and they're at each other's throats. It's much, much more complicated than that, and not an equal power dynamic. And I talk about this in the article, but like, it's a tense history that has moments of tremendous solidarity and tremendous division. Solidarity is about commonality of oppression, which is why you've seen Black people risk give up their lives in struggles against fascism, and Jewish people, fight in the civil rights movement, for example, or fight in Harlem in the 1930s as, against depression, evictions and things like that. Is because there is that history of commonality, but there's also a history that's I think even much more intense, of Jewish people being the local business owners in Black neighborhoods, because Jewish people used to live in those neighborhoods and they held on to the small businesses. So then Jewish people are the face of power and authority in those neighborhoods, even if they're not necessarily the people in power or authority in society as a whole, or make up maybe a part of that, but certainly not the dominating force of authority in our society, I would argue, by any stretch. And so that's created a history of tension, and it's something that Malcolm wrestled with. It's something that this is what I write in the article, is that you really cannot find a Black political thinker of the last 100 years who hasn't in their writing wrestled with the question of Jews. Are they allies? Are they not? And are they trustworthy? Are they not? And these are worthy questions given the history between the two communities. And that does lead to some the conspiratorial stuff, what have you. But what's different about Kyrie is, and I looking at the whole history of this tension between Black people and Jewish people, the reaction of like the white Christian fascist right wing to that conflict has basically been, screw them both. Let them fight each other. We could care less. To see Kyrie immediately have these allies on the white fascist right, to see them support him, to see them tweet about him, to see them celebrate him and this film on their message boards. That to me is what's new about this and what's particularly frightening about this, because we know the influence that Kyrie has, not just in terms of people and fans, but in terms of NBA locker rooms. And not necessarily because he's everybody's best friend in the NBA, but because you know as well as anybody, Etan, that there is a code about, criticizing other players, especially when they're being piled on by the media.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually understand that. Reggie Miller called players out for not being more vocal against Kyrie. I reject that from Reggie Miller, because I understand why people would not want to be part of a generalized pile-on against a player, given the amount of pressure that players are under. But that's why it's all more important for me, why I felt like I needed to add my voice to a lot of the voices writing about this. One, because I think a lot of the columns have been bad and not political and not historical and not trying to understand the context
Mm-hmm.
at all. But also because, I mean, it's important to, this is what I believe, is that it's important to challenge ideas with ideas. And I'll just end with this, is my editor said to me, well, what are you calling for? Are you calling for him to be suspended? Are you calling him for to be fined? It's like, well, what's the actionable item? And I said, the actionable item is knowledge, the actual knowledge of self, knowledge of the world, because you can't say, well, the problem is not Jewish people. The problem is these mega rich billionaires who are living on yachts while the world burns. And then at the same time say, if only billionaire Joseph Tsai would come protect us and find Kyrie, then we would have justice in the world. Kind of hypocritical to make that argument. So, to put it mildly. So I kept that out of the piece, and I drew a sharp line. Normally, I'm very coachable, editors, if you're listening to this. But on that one, I wasn't going to budge, because I do think like I would have been against it if it was like, we're going to suspend Kyrie, we're going to fine Kyrie. And I'm glad he's not being, at this time anyway, suspended or fined. But I do think it needs to be challenged ideologically, because it's wrong and potentially very harmful given some of the allies surrounding Kyrie.
So there's a lot with this.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry about that.
No. That's good. That was a good layout. And it's interesting, because what I hear you're saying is that a lot of the reactions is what was a lot of your point of contention, in meaning the conservative right, the white supremacists applauding him. And I 100% get that, because you have to be very careful about who is cheering you on. And if you're not trying to align with them, you do have to make it known, like in the case that you gave with Bradley Beal. So I 100% understand that. But listening to his press conference, let me just read a few things that he said in his press conference. So he said, I'm not a divisive person when it comes to religion. I embrace all walks of life. You see it on all my platforms. I talk to all races, all cultures, all religions. And my response would be, it's not about educating yourself on what anti-Semitism is. It's really about where the root words come from, and understanding that this is an African heritage that is also belonging to the people. I'm listening to that and I'm like, okay, that's a belief. He's going towards a belief that is different than a lot of people have. He went on to say, Africa is in it, whether we want to dismiss it or not. So the claims of anti-Semitism, who are the original chosen people of God, and we go into these religious conversations, and it's a big no-no. I don't live my life that way. I don't live my life that way. He said it twice. I grew up in a melting pot, and I say a melting pot of all races, white, black, red, yellow, Jewish, Christian, Muslim. You see the way I live my life now. I'm not here to be divisive. So I hear that in his press conference. And of course, later on he had to spat back and forth with the reporter who wanted him to give, a little bit specific details and what don't you. And Kyrie could have answered those questions and kind of put all speculation to bed, but I don't hear from his press conference that he is endorsing anti-Semitism. I heard him say, and this is just what I heard. I heard him say, when I post something, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, when I post something, it does not mean that I support everything that's being said or everything that's being done, or that I'm promoting or campaigning for anything. All I do is post things for my people and my community that is going to impact. So I look at myself, and I've shared things with people, and I didn't necessarily, agree with everything about it, but I'm sharing it for, a discussion. I share things with my kids all the time, and just say, like, what do you think about this? Without me interjecting and saying what my opinion is, what is your opinion on this? But it's not an endorsement of it. So I keep hearing people say that he shared it without context, and I just said it myself. But I'm like, well, if you're sharing information for other people to decipher, is that an endorsement? Is that saying that you agree with everything that you shared, or can you be sharing it for content, for people to make their own decisions? The way he said, I'm sharing it with my followers, with my community, with my people. So I had a little bit of a different interpretation when I initially saw it, and then when I heard his press conference explaining why he shared it. What is your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, I just think, we're in an age that if you're putting something forward to see, you have to be either really careful about what it is or really intentional about what it is. And again, I got to go back to this point is I think Kyrie in his press conference, I didn't appreciate it because I thought he was being coy. Instead of, and I repeat this, like, that this is somebody very smart who knows what he's doing. And I think there are things to share and say people should check this out and see what they think. But again, you got to be very clear about what you think too. And this particular thing, I mean, it's sort of like, I mean, these ideas, I've just seen them poison the well so many times that even the level of what do you think is a very difficult thing for me to swallow. Like, this film argues that Hitler said, and there's like fake quotes from Hitler about Jewish people and what they mean and all the stuff. And it's not even real quotes by Hitler. And then the question becomes, what do you think about that? What do I think about fake quotes from Adolf Hitler? Like, I can't really get my head around why someone would share that. I mean, even to get people to think about what it is. And it's like, that's what I can't get over. It's like, what are we sharing? What context are we providing for that? And how are we trying to treat people? Like, I would be really upset if an athlete posted like Birth of a Nation without context. Now, there are things in Birth of a Nation, the film that revived the Ku Klux Klan in 19, I believe, 15. There are parts of Birth of a Nation that revolutionized filmmaking and that need to be studied just from the perspective of, oh, no film has done parallel editing before, or things like that. But then, but you can't be blind to the content, which is some of the most horrifically racist images in the history of film. And it was a film that inspired a level of hatred and violence. I mean, the Klan was basically almost non-existent by 1915, and it led to this massive revival because this film was so deep. And let's be clear, people knew about that at the time. The NAACP picketed theaters that showed Birth of a Nation. Mm-hmm. It's not like people were blind to the power it could have. And in this day and age, and that's 1915, in this day and age where ideas can spread so quickly and influence so quickly, that, to me, the kind of ideas represented to me, like, represent like an active threat. And I frankly wish I could do more than just write an article and say, this is why it's wrong. But what we don't have in this country, and this is where, to me, it gets really important, is a mass movement that stands against all oppression. Because we do live in this is the part that's so important to me, and why I just can't stand articles that put the focus on Kyrie slowly as if he's introducing anti-Semitism into the world or something, or introducing these ideas to the world. It's like without the kind of mass movement that expresses a different set of ideas, people are forced to look at their own lives, see all the injustices in the world, and try to come up with their own solution for why that's the case. So you see this film, you think the world is messed up, and you say, okay, this makes sense. Maybe this is why the world's messed up. And there's no voices saying, well, wait a minute, put those away, because those ideas have led us down a wrong path for over 100 years. And who do they really benefit? If everybody's like, oh, the problem is the Jews. And meanwhile, Elon Musk is smiling there, cashing checks. And so this is just more my point, is that like there has to be some sense of what the ideas are and what the effect could have. And I don't think it's enough to just put it out there and just be like, just putting it out into the world.
Okay. I think
Now,
that's
this
fair.
is like the most popular film. And also I in my very first line, the very first 4 words of my piece are thanks to Jeff Bezos, comma, because to me, that's where you get to full accountability. Like, why is Amazon platforming this?
Right.
Where anybody can get it. And to me, that's the starting point, because people are looking for ideas. And I just fear the ideas these days that people are reaching for. We're going to see that in the elections on Tuesday, because of the absence of a movement like what we saw in 2020, trying to put a different set of ideas forward.
Well, I definitely agree that, and it's a good point that you made, that when you do post something to that level, you do kind of got to give it context, because it's a good idea too, because then people can think many different things. They can think that you're endorsing it. They can think that you're promoting it. They can think that you agree with everything that is being said. They can think a lot of different things. And I do also feel that when he went to the press conference, he kind of could have made that point clear. He could have. He said a lot in the press conference. I didn't think he was being coy until he had the, I understand the interaction with Nick Fidel. And he asked him to clarify, and he felt that he already did clarify, which he kind of did. He said, I didn't mean it to mean what you're saying I meant it to mean. He did say that. But it was also good. He deleted the tweet. And ESPN reported that his camp has been in constant communication with the Nets and the Defamation League, and he is listening to breakdowns of why people found this tweet so offensive, and so he's talking to people and taking some steps to hear the other side. I don't know if you view that as a positive or not. How do you view that part?
I think that's, I'd want a little more, for myself. This is serious enough and public enough that I'll be doing some Googling when we're done, because I'd love to have some meat on the bone as far as what kind of idea. I don't trust the Anti-Defamation League. That's a whole other question. So I want to know what's actually being said. Like, for example, it's like the people by the court with the T-shirts that said "Fight Anti-Semitism." Like, there was a part of me that was like, okay, on one level, I would rather see that than Kyrie suspended or fined. Like, put the ideas out there and let him see that he affected people. On the other side, if I was doing that, I would have had something that said something like, stop anti-Semitism, racism, and all forms of oppression. Because once we start segmenting ourselves off, I think and not showing that we want to offer, as Jewish people, active solidarity against what is so central to the United States, and that's anti-Black racism.
Yeah.
I think we find ourselves in trouble, and they weren't doing that. And it gets to a bigger issue of, well, I'll stop there. You go ahead, Etan.
Sorry. That is also a lot of people's issues, is that it always is specific. That was kind of the issues with Kanye. That, certain things were allowed for him to say, anti-Black things, disrespect George Floyd's family, wear the White Lives Matter t-shirt, say that slavery was a choice, say that Harriet Tubman didn't all those different things. And companies had no problem standing by him. Adidas actually came out with a statement, said we still support Kanye. But then once he said something that offended Jewish people, then it was immediate backlash. So that's a little bit of the issue that people do have. So
I get that.
yeah. So speaking to the
time.
yeah, so speaking to the people in the season ticket holders with the shirts, the concern wasn't anything else but what was specifically offensive to Jewish people. And when people see that and identify that as a issue, it does become more divisive. But I want to go back to my question from before. Do you still think that it's fair to label Kyrie Irving as anti-Semitic?
Well, I can't see in his heart, and I think he was putting forward a set of anti-Semitic ideas by promoting the film and by promoting Alex Jones, who is
so he addressed the promotion part. He talked about, he said specific, and that was started his whole spat with Nick Fidel, and he said, why can you please stop using the word promote? He was like, I'm not promoting anything. I shared information, but I didn't endorse. He's like, I didn't. He was very specific with that. So I understood the level of frustration that the interaction with Nick Fidel kind of went to, because it was almost like he kept answering him the same questions that he already asked. He said, that's not what I was trying to do. But Nick Fidel didn't want to accept it, but wanted to give more specifics, which is a reporter's job as well. So I understand both sides. But he did kind of answer the question, like we're talking about the Alex Jones. He said specifically he does not support Alex Jones. Like that was the exact words he said, and he was tweeting this about what he specifically said about, what was it, secret societies or something like that. He's like, but nothing about the statements that he made about the kids of Sandy Hook. Now that one he got specific with. So to be fair, you could agree with something that someone says on one topic and not endorse the person as a whole, right? I mean, between, We Matter, Athletes and Activism, and Police Brutality and White Supremacy, The Fight Against American Traditions, the two books, I probably interviewed over like 100 different people, but doesn't mean I am fully endorsing everything about any of them. You know what I mean? I'm talking to them about this one topic. I remember our discussion, and a lot of people's discussions, like, what is Jake Tapper doing in your book about what? And I was like, well, it was specific to how he responded to the domestic terrorist attacks on January 6th. That's specifically what it was. So I don't think you have to fully endorse them. Now, it might have been bad timing, you know what I mean, with everything that was going on with Alex Jones, but it doesn't mean that he's a supporter of Alex Jones as a whole, right?
I mean, I go with intentionality on this.
Okay.
It's one thing if you were, like, for example, Jake Tapper,
Okay.
like if you'd interviewed him about, say, Israel,
Okay.
and I disagree very strongly with Jake Tapper about Israel.
As do I.
Without commentary from yourself. I love interviewing Jake Tapper about fatherhood, about January 6th.
Right.
That's really important. I'd love to talk to Kyrie, for example, about his Native American traditions that he's so connected to, about some, and people can look it up. I've written, and this is part of the thing that stings so much.
Mm-hmm.
I've written defenses of Kyrie when everybody else was in pile-on mode.
Right.
And I also think we just live in a day and age, Etan, where it's like Kyrie can say he's not promoting it, but to me, that's like saying you don't believe in gravity when you're falling out of an airplane. You can say you don't believe in it, but if you're putting a film out there, the same way when you put the fatherhood book out there, it's not that you're promoting everything the person believes, but you are saying that Jake Tapper, just to keep using that example, has something of value to say about this. Like if you had said to Jake Tapper, what do you think about January 6th? And he had said, I think the whole thing was orchestrated by Jewish people and the Black Lives Matter movement.
Mm-hmm.
Like you would have, you may or may not have included it in the book, but I know you would have pushed back on it.
You would have debated.
And had, like, it either wouldn't have made it or it would have made it, and you would have had serious context about why that was a ridiculous thing for him to say.
Well, we would have debated, and I would have presented why I disagree with what he said, and he would have presented. So in some of the books, like with Michael Eric Dyson, when I was talking to him to We Matter, it was a whole big debate. We was going back and forth the whole time. That's all it was. Like, I have no problem with debating with someone that I disagree with on a topic, but I also don't have a problem with agreeing with them on one thing that they said without agreeing with them as a whole. And I think that's kind of, you know, and now I'll agree with you. It's probably bad timing for Kyrie to agree with anything that Alex Jones said just now, but it doesn't mean that he was fully endorsing Alex Jones, especially when he specifically said during the press conference, "I do not endorse Alex Jones." Like, he couldn't be any clearer.
I see, but I think it's like the expression. I think it's one of those things where he's very intentional. It's not bad timing for him. Like, I mean, for me, it would be, or someone else, it might be bad timing, because sometimes I don't think before I post. Like, I think there's an intentionality to it. Like, why do it now when all the stuff with Kanye is happening? It just is like he's way too smart for that. And that doesn't mean I'm trying to divine beliefs in him that he doesn't have. But at the very, I think, like, we can't have this discussion without the context of how scary things are right now and how dangerous and polarizing things are right now, where something like this, like posting a video like this, has real teeth. You know, it's like, I'll give you, like, other players, you know, Steven Jackson, to use one example, who I respect on a lot of levels, you know, said something that was that I believe to be anti-Jewish. And it was one of those things where, you know, some people got upset about it, some people didn't. It certainly didn't hurt his career prospects. You know, he's on Showtime, I think it is, with Matt Barnes, what have you. But that was a different moment when he said that, in a different context. This is, and he certainly didn't have allies rush to his defense who post on message boards about shooting up synagogues and things like that. Like, these are the same message boards. I mean, Nazis are, I mean, you probably heard about this, but, you know, having pro Kanye rallies or projecting images like that Kanye told the truth about Jews. I mean, they put that on the side of a football stadium on Saturday with this huge projector. It's a scary moment.
And I hear you.
I want people don't have to rise to the occasion.
Right.
I'm certainly not looking at NBA players to rise to the occasion. I think this has to happen off the court, where we rise to the occasion. But when you have someone with influence like that put those ideas out into the mainstream, it changes the balance of things in a way that can be really scary.
But is it fair to call him anti-Semitic? You know what I mean? I mean, you could say, so what you're describing now was poor timing. The where we are in the world, who the people are who you know, responded to him and supported it and everything like that. But is it fair to call him anti-Semitic?
I think he did anti-Semitism a very big favor.
That wasn't my question, though. Is it fair to call him?
I told you I can't look into his heart.
But that's what. But this is
thinking, and I can't trust these press conferences, because, like I said, I think my opinion is that there's an intentionality with this that he's not going to just come forward and say, because he's way too smart for that. And I mean, it's like playing with where the line is, so he doesn't get fined or suspended, doesn't get suspended from the league. But at the same time, you've got people on message boards doing dances because he put this thing out, and they're not even watching the film. They're going by the highlights, the articles, like, oh, he quoted Hitler, or, you know, like, this is you know, this is white supremacist prom for them that he's putting this stuff out.
So let me give you an example. When the thing happened with Sarver, Robert Sarver, and I wrote an article about Brian Scalabrine, and I talked about how he was saying that he didn't think that was a big deal that Robert Sarver used the N-word. And I said, well, I'm going to, you know, I could explain to you, you know, if my grandfather was here, he would explain to you, he would explain to Adam Silver, he would explain to Robert Sarver and anybody else who didn't understand why it wasn't acceptable for a white person to use the N-word in any context, right? So he said, so I went on his show and I talked to him, and he said, we were going back and forth, and he said, yeah, the people in the comments section were all calling me racist. I was like, but I didn't call you racist. He was like, yeah, but all the people and all the reaction from it, everybody was saying, oh, Scalabrine is a racist. Scalabrine. I was like, wait, I didn't say any of that. I repeated what you said, was that you didn't think that Sarver was a racist, and you didn't understand why it wasn't acceptable for a white person to use the N-word. So, and I'm using that as an example because I can't control the people in the comment section. I usually don't even read the comment section, to be honest with you. But if his point was like, well, you said this and the comment people said this, so that means that you were calling me a racist too. I was like, no, you can't jump from that to that because that's not what I said. So relating this to Kyrie, I mean, what Kyrie said in his press conference was specifically, I love people of all religions. Like, I don't, like, that's what he said. So to make the jump from that Kyrie, which is going on right now, all through, not speaking to you directly, even though in the title said Kyrie's anti-Semitism, so that did kind of lean towards that. The subtitle, I mean, for the article, but to make that jump to Kyrie being anti-Semitic, I don't know if that's fair. That's a big label to put on someone, and I'm like, well, show me the proof of. Now, if he would have came to the thing and said something like, yeah, this is what I feel, and this, and I feel that, then that's different. But that's not what he did, right?
No, he's letting the film do that talking for him. I mean, and that's my issue with it. And the message thing is really important because it's not just about people on messages talking crap. I mean, it's the message boards that people blame for Charlottesville, that people blame for the shooting in the Pittsburgh synagogue. Like, these aren't benign message boards of people just sounding off. And like we talked about Bradley Beal, there's a responsibility when you have actionable violence in the streets, and even the Speaker of the House is not immune from it. Like, that we be very careful with what we put forward. And the thing about it too is I got to go back to this. It's like, so Brian Scalabrine from a position of power defends a racist, and that's really messed up. You've got people, and I would never obviously defend that in 1,000 years. That's really messed up. And I'm sure there were people out there who were racist who were like, yeah, go for it, Scalabrine. But this is a little different because what Kyrie was trafficking in is something that has led to some of the most horrific crimes that of the last 100 years that were like openly, I mean, I'm only in this country because of the protocols of the elders of Zion, because it made living in Russia impossible for my great grandparents to be under the constant threat of violence. And this is where you get to something that's a whole separate topic, but about Jewish people, I mean, and whiteness more broadly. Because Jewish people, particularly in the generations after World War II, when support for Israel became so critical for U.S. foreign policy,
right,
is almost like my great grandfather was not seen as white, but my grandfather was, and that's a very odd thing to sort of go through in your own family history.
Right.
But it's like, but what you're seeing right now, and this is what's scary and real and something that I have to figure out how to deal with my family, is that whiteness on the far Nazi right is, when it comes to Jewish people, is something that they're trying to turn politically into something conditional.
Okay.
Like maybe you're not part of this country. And I'm talking about like the words of like Donald Trump, the leader of one of the main political parties in the United States, is making statements like, I love Israeli Jews, the American Jews, aren't real with that regard. If they were, they'd support Israel. And that's when you're just like, holy crap, because they can be as cruel to us as they want and justify it by saying, well, they're not real Jews anyway. There was even this discourse about like, how can it be anti-Semitic? Like I said, and this was a white far right guy who said this. He said, how could it be anti-Semitic with what Kanye's saying if they're not real Jews in the first place? Because all we're really taking on are the imposters. And from their standpoint, like, I'm totally an imposter. I'm an imposter to the 50th power. And it raises scary questions about who they think is available for violence and who isn't. And we have to be very vigilant about that, given the social context which is why I think the standard, it's not just Kyrie, like why the standard every single public figure needs to be held towards, to me, is, are you making the people with the guns happy or are you not? You know, and it's just too fraught to play around with that right now. We're playing with serious nitroglycerin with some of these ideas, and it requires a vigilance and a condemnation of the ideas that I think is really important. And it's so public these days, Etan, with social media, that if Kyrie is really getting something out of what the Nets are trying to put forward or what individuals are trying to put forward, like, we need to hear about that too. I think this needs to be a much more public discussion. And I'll tell you this too. It's like I had, and this was just, I don't want to say the team, but I had like a representative from an NBA team reach out to me, and this was weird. Like, reach out to me like 36 hours ago,
Mm-hmm.
be like, do you know anybody who can come speak to our locker room about this issue? Because it's all people are talking about. And the discourse is very much, you know, in defense of Kyrie, not defense of the ideas of that film,
Mm-hmm.
but in
Okay.
defense of him as an individual. And what's scary about that, Etan, is it makes me, you know, it's like, you know me, it's like, you got to learn from history. You got to look at what's happening. And it makes me think a little bit of the way a lot of players were kneeling initially in support of Colin Kaepernick, and just be like, oh, they're piling on Colin. We'll show you solidarity. You got to
Mm-hmm.
pile on us too. But then the process of then these players being piled upon radicalized them and made them say, well, actually, I'm against police brutality too. I'm against racial inequity too. And I think there's a fear in the NBA that if this is something that continues down this road, that players are going to be asked, like, do you support or not support Kyrie, whatnot? And that could lead to a public relations disaster for the
Of course.
NBA of
But of
rather
course it
epic
will.
proportions. So I'm glad NBA teams are maybe trying to be proactive about this, but to me, it just speaks to how ideas can also change. I'm not saying this is happening, but it speaks to how ideas can change and migrate and become common currency. And these set of ideas are, I believe, are scary.
But the
And
answer is the answer to the set of ideas that are out there that are on and on Amazon, that is now the number one seller on Amazon. I don't know if that was after Kyrie talked about it or if it was before, but I'm pretty sure it was after. But it's the number one seller on Amazon now. You know, but is the answer to silence the discussion or have a discussion? You know what I mean? Because it seems like there's room to have a discussion, I believe, on just about any topic. I mean, even if the discussion is, I disagree with what you're saying, and this is the reason why I disagree. Sometimes if you just have a label like anti-Semitic, that shuts down the conversation and shuts down everything. It's kind of seems like I don't want to say a lazy response, or a response when you want to, you know, put the whole thing to bed, or when you want to have a real discussion of, okay, what is it that we should be discussing about this? I just think it. So I look at it like, so okay, so I took a college. In college, I took a class and I learned about all different religions. It was like a religions of the world class or something like that. And I learned about different beliefs that were contrary to what I believed as a Christian. But I didn't interpret what I was reading as anti-Christian. It was just a different belief. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with reading about a different belief. And, you know, maybe if Kyrie would have explained why he shared the documentary from Hebrews to Negroes that way, would he still have been labeled anti-Semitic? Because I didn't see him endorse it. It was like, this is a different belief. And when he was in the press conference, everything that he said was leaning towards, I wanted to share this information with my followers and my people. So I don't know. I get a little bit nervous when people want to kind of silence discussion, information, anything, even if it's just to have a discussion and say, I disagree with what you're saying. They just want to silence it completely. And that's kind of what I see the right doing with CRT. We want to silence it. We want to have any discussion about it. We want to ban the books. We want to take it completely off. And I'm like, well, not even a discussion? It can't even be talked about.
So, I mean, and this is a big difference, is they're using state power to silence discussions about racism to the point of which teachers are losing their employment. People there in some states, like you can sue the school board. In Oklahoma, you know this, in Tulsa, they're talking about putting the whole school board in like some sort of state-run receivership because of a discussion in a teacher training session, not even in a classroom. And in this case, I'm just sharing ideas becomes to me really rough when the ideas are about, Satanism and drinking blood, and Hitler had some really good ideas. Like, I'm not saying even with that this idea that, Kyrie should be banned from playing, the movie should be burned in the public square or anything of the sort. But it, to me, is not just like, oh, good, more dialogue. It's holy shit. My family might be pretty screwed when I see that it's the #1 film on Amazon, because especially in this climate where violence is seen as somehow legitimate political speech. Like, what is it going to mean for me and my family that this film could become, a variation of a kind of Birth of a Nation, where people say, okay, these are the ideas that I'm comfortable with, and it changes the whole discourse about what is or isn't allowed to be said about a group of people who are at this point, under a scary drumbeat of attack. And so that's what I keep coming back to and also I said this, but I'll say it again. It's just like we live in an era where if you're going to post something, if you don't have some sort of disclaimer, I mean, it's going to be seen as an endorsement. We could argue about that not being fair, which I'm willing to have that discussion for sure. And also the way, I mean, because it's the only way I know how, the way I think we fight this is with debate and is with ideas.
I agree.
Otherwise, you run into the issue of, like I said at the beginning of the conversation, begging for billionaires to save us, which I don't think is an appropriate response. Joseph Tsai, please be the voice of fighting oppression. I'm not, going down that road.
Right.
And I think I don't know how else to, other than weathering the storm, because this is going to be a storm. It's why the Nazis call their site Stormfront. I mean, and how we're going to weather that is, to me, going to determine the next 20, 30 years, really, is what is the thing about it. But feeling under threat is going to be, I think, a shock for a lot of Jewish people who got very comfortable with their whiteness.
Well, when you use words like under threat, and kind of relating that to Kyrie, I think that's a little like a lot. I don't, and I hear what you're saying as far as the documentary being a threat to, but then it's weaponizing it, and I just didn't hear him weaponizing anything in the press conference. Now, I think that some more discussion definitely needs to be had. I think it would be great to have, but I don't think the answer right now, which is everybody is leaning towards, is just to silence everything. Just stop, the media, the collective media. I was sitting here listening to different clips of, all media giving their opinion on this, and they're kind of upset that the Nets didn't suspend him, didn't punish him, didn't do something to reprimand him and I'm like, well, to your point, is that the answer? Is to just remand him, squash it, nobody else bring this up again, or you'll be punished as well? I can't wrap my arms around that kind of notion, because then that spills into everything. I mean, and for an athlete to speak out on something, sometimes it's to spark a debate, to spark a discussion. And there are going to be people who are very upset that the athlete did bring this up, to the point where they have threats. I've experienced that myself. I mean, when I spoke out against the invasion of Iraq, there was a lot of people that weren't happy with me. I started getting death threats, started getting mail delivered to the Verizon Center that I was anti-American, anti-this. I was like, well, wait a minute. You know what I mean? I didn't say all of that. I said that I was opposed to the invasion of Iraq. You're the only reporter that even would allow me to make that position known. The Washington Post didn't want to. The Washington Times didn't want to. It was only Dave Zirin, who was working for the PG Post or something like that at the time, that even wanted to talk about it. So their answer then was to silence me. That was the answer. You know what I mean? I interviewed Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf in my book, Police Brutality and White Supremacy, the fight against American traditions. And he talked about the backlash that he received when and you interviewed him well. Great. It was a great interview on Edge of Sports, you know, and he talked about it in his new book as well. But the backlash that he received was just to silence. And I was like, that wasn't the answer then. And I don't think it's the answer now, to silence opposition, to silence something that you're opposed to, no matter what it is, but to dialogue. Like this should, this is just me. I don't want to keep going because I want to get you to analyze, but I think that dialogue helps bring about different levels of understanding, different levels of intention, different levels of, and that's something that me and you are able to do, and even have a discussion where you see something one way and I see something another way. You know what I mean? But I'm not hearing a discussion like this anywhere where you can say, well, wait, or one person says, well, wait a minute. Did Kyrie really say all of that? Was that his message? Is it fair to label him as anti-Semitic? Is it fair? I haven't heard anybody even bring that up. It's just, he's anti-Semitic. He should be suspended. It's terrible what he's doing. You know, the Nets should think about waiving him. You know, he's an idiot, like what Charles Barkley and Shaq said. Oh, he's an idiot. I was like, why does he have to be an idiot? Just, you know, like, why don't
I don't think he's an idiot at all. And I you know, in some respect, and I know we're running out of time, but people who are quote unquote idiots, and I don't even like that word, quite frankly, because of some of its roots. But like that's a lot easier to deal with. I mean, I think Kyrie is incredibly intelligent, which is one of the things that makes this, for me, very disappointing, because I think it's a little bit of a false equivalency, because Etan, I mean, we have to look at the political content. Like, when you stood up for the people of Iraq, that was a statement of, to me, forget about whether it was courageous or not courageous, because I think it was courageous. Other people would say not. You weren't renouncing the humanity of one of the groups involved and putting that up for debate. And that, to me, is when you got to call it out. Like, all right, I'm all for debate times 1,000. I'm all for debate about what Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf did and why I think it was important. But are we really going to debate whether I drink blood? I mean,
oh, that's what you mean. I was going to ask, what do you mean by renouncing the humanity? But okay, that's what you're talking about.
Yeah,
or
that I eat children. I'm not saying Kyrie thinks that I drink blood or eat children, but he did put out a film that said, "Hey, you got to watch these modern Jews, white Jews, because they are nefarious."
And I haven't seen the film, so I'm not at all trying to. I haven't seen it. I haven't, you know.
I think you'd agree with me that
that sounds horrible. That part that you just said, it sounds horrible. I saw what he mentioned. He didn't mention that part in his press conference. What he mentioned in the press conference was, who are God's chosen people. That's what he mentioned, and that has been something that has been debated for I don't know how long. And I think that is there's nothing wrong with that debate. I don't think that dehumanizes anybody. I mean, I think there's different.
No, I agree. Would that were the film? I wish it was. But Protocols of Elders of Zion wasn't written by anybody in the Black community or anything that expressed any kind of, you know, African consciousness. I mean, this is, like I said, this is Tsarist Russia at work. And tragically, it's a best-selling book. And this is a good example. It's a best-selling book in the Arab world. And one of the reasons for that is people are trying to understand why Israel acts in such a horrifically nefarious way in the region. So people are looking for answers to try to understand that. And the answer I would give is that Israel is critical to U.S. foreign policy, so they arm it to the teeth with nuclear weapons, and it's a country built on stolen land precisely so there can be kind of a European outpost in the middle of the Middle East.
Okay.
But it hurts to know that, like, this is one of the ways people are trying to understand the injustices that they see. And I don't blame people for trying to understand it. I blame, I don't want to even use the word blame, but I put the responsibility on the rest of us to build intersectional movements that allow for us standing up for each other. And this is where my Jewish community, I think, falls terribly short, precisely because of that question that we discussed earlier of conditional whiteness. But I, and we want the whiteness part and don't care about the conditional part.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's another question that I think is a fair question, is what is considered anti-Semitic. And then now let's put the movie aside, because documentary aside, because I haven't read any of that. But having a discussion where, just as far as what people do know about heard the press conference, heard what Kyrie said, heard different things, heard what you just said about Israel and why it's such a power. There are many who would say, well, that's kind of anti-Semitic to think that, but right. And I've been accused of being anti-Semitic when I, spoke about Israel. I didn't take the position that Israel has the right to defend itself, no matter what. You know what I mean? I didn't take that position. I was like, wait a minute, they just slaughtered all these Palestinians, and you're okay, and it just because.
And why is that defense?
Right. They say that's anti-Semitic. So then it's like, what conversation is taboo? You know what I mean? Like, what part is on the table for discussion that we can have a discussion about, like me and you are having a discussion now, and what topics are off limits and get the label of being anti-Semitic. And that's a tough debate to have, because right now it's such a fine line. It feels like almost anything having to do with the criticism towards anything that you. So even if I say, going back to what Kanye said, if I say, well, many of the Jewish owned record labels, maybe if I say that they would never allow, and you talked about this in your article as well. If my position was that they would never allow some of the negative images that are put out of Black people constantly, you know what I mean? Whether it's from the degrading images of women, the violence, everything like that, they would never allow that image of their own people to be put out, even if that was the popular image. You know what I mean? If I said that, that's not an anti-Semitic statement in my opinion, but many would say, okay, wait, that's anti-Semitic. You can't say that.
Well, but part of it is about, to me, it's like there has to be such a thing as objective truth. So while I think that, like, that's the music industry is a disgusting, horrifically exploitative business.
Yes.
I mean, it's because we live in a disgusting, to me, exploitative society. And it's not exclusively Jews that run that business. It's something that's uniform across the business. It's the same with media. It's like I said in my article, it's like Rupert Murdoch and his racist son aren't named Murdochowitz. There are all kinds of people who run the media. I mean, look at Elon Musk, for goodness sakes. The son of an apartheid emerald mine owner is now in charge of the most important public square that we have. And I do think that some ideas out there demand to be confronted and silenced. And I want to give an example of that, of what I mean by that. Like, I think if the Klan comes to your town, there are strategies that people say that should be dealt with. And, and it's like, I disagree with a lot of people on this. Like, some say, let them talk because free speech is an absolute right. And if we start making the Klan or the Nazis be quiet, then that'll migrate to the rest of us.
Okay.
There are other people who say, let them talk, but have like a silent vigil to show your disagreement. And then there are people who say, well, actually, we got to go occupy the space where they were going to talk, so they can't.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in the latter camp, because I think these ideas have a violent power to them that affect people, Black people, brown people. Like you saw when they came to DC, they vandalized Black churches.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, this is what we're up against, and we're either gonna come together or die apart, I think. And if there are more shootings at synagogues, if more Jews go into hiding because they're seen as not real Jews or all the rest of it, it's like we're just going to be a name on a checklist, and then they're going to go on to the next people and the next people and the next people until their ideal of a country where we're so silenced by fear. That's the thing about free speech and discussion. It's like if someone is doing a rally to say we want you silenced forever, that's not dialogue.
Right. I agree.
That's not free speech. And so that's where I come down on is I'm looking at the content of the ideas and what are their operational conclusions. And they don't lead me to having more space for free speech, but actually less.
But that's where everybody, I won't say everybody, but that's where a lot of people in the media right now are calling for Kyrie to be suspended or waived or anything like that. And I just don't know. I don't think that's the answer. I don't think that's, it's interesting. I interviewed NBA Commissioner Adam Silver in my book, We Matter Athletes and Activism. And I asked him point blank, would you punish someone for talking about an athlete for voicing an opinion that you disagree with? Because that's always the caveat. Everybody applauds athletes when they agree with them, but it's when you disagree, when something that falls into a different category that you can give a list of reasons why the athlete should not have said that. And he said he wouldn't. He said he wouldn't as long as it was presented respectfully. And I just feel like if it's leading towards people calling for Adam Silver to now step in and suspend Kyrie, that if he did that, it would kind of go against everything that he told me in my book. Like it would be like, it's hard to pick and choose what athlete has the right to speak. Now, everybody has the right to disagree. And that's why I think the dialogue and the discussion comes. But to silence like that part just, and I've been consistent with this. I wrote a piece about Nick Bosa when he was, tweeting all the stuff about Trump. I was like, well, no, he has every right to tweet what he wants to. We have the right to disagree. I invited Enos Cannon Freedom on the Rematch when I disagree with everything that he said when he was on Tucker Carlson. I can go down the list. So it's not about disagreeing or endorsing what the person said, but it's just the ideal that if somebody says something that you disagree with for whatever the reason, and I'm talking more about athletes, that the answer is to punish them, silence them. And I've seen that too much. So that's what makes me a little nervous, Dave. I'm gonna be honest with you. That's the part is understandable why I get nervous when I hear that.
Of course I understand. My goodness, because of the history of silencing Black athletes. Makes it so you have to be vigilant when this takes place, because that's one of the part of the things where racism does come into the picture, where Kyrie is going to be affected by this in a way that Ted Cruz won't, or even in a way Kanye won't, because Kanye is an independent operator. But when you're on a team, you're a worker, and you're under somebody else's thumb, and that's always going to have to be a concern. And I totally understand that. I think there is such thing as ideas that are outside. I guess it's called the Overton window. Like when you start to accept that certain ideas are part of the debate, it then changes the whole debate to the left or to the right. And I think this is a situation that clearly the right wing is more comfortable talking about. And you have some or are celebrating. And when you have some, you do have reporters, of course, and Reggie Miller and Charles Barkley saying this is an outrage and all the rest of it. But I'm much more interested in what the response is going to be on the ground. And so either the Jewish community is going to figure out how to fight anti-Black racism, or I think we're in for a lot of trouble, because I'm worried about the depths of the divisions that are being created, especially when I see a film like this at the top of the Amazon news. But this has been a great discussion. I actually have to go.
I was gonna end real quick with a quote of yours. Let me quote you real quick, and then we can end. All right. And we just quote you real quick. This is how you ended the article. You said, "Let's all pledge to wake up and learn from the past, but to not be shackled by it. A system that feeds upon division is the problem. The only people who benefit from division are the mega rich and powerful who come in all religions, frolicking on yachts while the world quietly literally burns. The Christo-fascists who won't stop with the Jews. They'll just be names to check off on a list on their way to other targets. We will either be united in fear or we will be united against a common enemy. I'm not sure what the future holds much else. And I think that was a great way to end it. So it's to your point that you want us to be able to come together, you know what I mean, and understand who is kind of pushing this, and that the people pushing this don't like either one of us. That's what you're saying. And we're targets for both of them. So when they finish with one, they come right after the other. And I
want to be very clear for folks watching this is I very much respect your vigilance, Etan, because we know how, particularly of athletes, particularly of Black athletes, that effort to silence can migrate towards all sorts of issues. So thank you for your work. I want to say.
Thank you for the discussion.
All right.